Recently, I was faced with a conundrum, which is that over the past year, I have been running ads, and that has been going really well. So well, in fact, that it has made me start to question the content that I make, because I have been making content for over 10 years, over a decade. Now, for Ostara specifically, it's only around 5 or so, but I've been making content for a really long time and trying to sort of crack the code on content. And honestly, I don't feel any closer than I did over a decade ago. I just don't seem to be able to figure out the code that is, what makes something go viral. And so I started to ask myself this question of, should I even make content anymore? Or should I just focus all of my efforts and attention on advertising and, building my business in that way? And so I was reaching out to a bunch of people and, having conversations or asking for their feedback, all of that sort of stuff. And I still felt stuck. I wasn't finding anything. And then finally, I had a conversation with someone. One of the cool things about coaching is that even though it is a one-way relationship, a one-way street, where in coaching it is actually very important that I am helping you and you do not feel the obligation to help me. One of the reasons that that's important is because that relationship does not exist in a healthy way outside of that context. In most relationships, it is supposed to be a two-way street. And there is an obligation or an expectation that you take care of the other person as well as they take care of you. But the nice thing about coaching is that there is no obligation like that. I am there to serve you, and that is it. But despite that, inevitably, when you are working as a coach with a client, the clients inevitably end up helping you. So a simple example of this is, if you are talking about these ways that are important to take care of yourself, and then you realize that you're not taking care of yourself in that way, it helps you to be like, oh, wow, well, if I'm going to, be telling my clients this, it's important that I practice it too. And so in a similar sort of way, I was having a conversation recently and someone said to me, if you were doing this as a job back in the day, this would not be a job. It would be like you would be a hermit in a hut somewhere that people would, come and stumble upon, and then they would talk to you and find, have conversations and, like get wisdom or whatever. And I know this sounds weird, but that actually really resonated with me. I was like, yeah, that feels absolutely true to me. And the thing about hermits and huts is that they have certain qualities, one of which is solitude. And I already have this experience that I actually really enjoy my solitude. Solitude is really sacred to me. And the other one is that they're not supposed to be famous. Like, if they were famous, they wouldn't be a hermit in a hut anymore. They would, be some famous person doing stuff. They're supposed to be a hole in the wall, right? That the weary traveler stumbles upon and, has some conversation and, gets some help or whatever the case. So you're going to keep doing content, but you're going to have a gimmick of dressing up as a hermit and decorating your space as a hut? Yes, you nailed, man. You don't get ahead of the story. But it is a good question. How does this hermit and hut thing that I'm talking about, how does that have anything to do with content? Well, before I get there, one other detail about this is that I've started discovering people like this. I've started discovering, as I work with more and more people, talk with more and more people, I have started discovering that there are other hermits and huts around the globe. And they all have this sort of solitariness to them. And it's not like we don't talk to people. It's not like we don't connect with people. I'm talking with people all the time. It's just that there is the sort of day to day of what we do is relatively solitary. And so when we talk about how this fits with content, I was thinking about, okay, if I sort of plug content into this analogy, this visualization that I have in my head, which, by the way, let me show y'all something real quick. Hold on. So as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, I was helping myself to visualize, and this is what I sort of visualized about it. Like, this is my little hermit hut. Has, some logs, can start a fire, sit down with a weary traveler, have some tea. And then inside my hut, it's so mossy. Yeah, I love moss. I love moss. I don't know why. This sort of magical mossy forest, lush mossy forest, I love it. I love it. It's all it's what I need. It's what I need in my life. And then this is the inside of the hut. That's not me. That take away the old man. But so this actually explains, I need to turn my camera back on. This actually explains what I imagine my content to be. My content is these, piles of books and notes, scrawls, pieces of parchment that I write. And then, as the weary traveler comes across my hut, if there's something that I think would be helpful to them, I share it with them. I, give it to them and say, hey, read this. I hope that it's helpful, useful, whatever for you. And what reinforced this idea was that I started to think about where I find fulfillment in my content. So, for instance, I have a short on YouTube that is probably the most successful piece of content that I have ever made. It has around, last time I checked, 23,000 views and continues to get views month after month. I posted it very early on in the Ostara content journey. And it's still getting views. Like, sometimes it will get more views in a week or a month or whatever in a 28-day period than one of the videos that I post that month, even though it's, super old. And I feel zero fulfillment from that. There's no excitement around getting 23K views. I remember, I would hear people talk about how on YouTube, I would hear people talk about how they feel such a sense of community with their YouTube community. And I never understood that because I've literally never experienced that on any other platform other than Twitch. Twitch is a place where I actually feel a sense of community. And I compared that experience, my YouTube experience with, a short getting 23K views, to my experience chatting with no more than 3 to 5 people on Twitch. Infinitely more fulfilling. Like, the conversation that I had with y'all last week when I was still pondering this was infinitely more fulfilling than any of those 23K views. And so this idea that Amanda Palmer talks about in her book of what creativity is, the book is The Art of Asking. And she talks about this idea of collecting, connecting, and sharing as the 3 parts of creativity, and my favorite part being sharing. And I had a conversation with somebody in Twitch chat talking about how that sharing is not as fulfilling when it falls on deaf ears. And the conclusion that we came to in that conversation was, well, then maybe the solution is to just ask people to engage with it. Directly ask people to either come to stream or to, read a piece of content or watch a piece of content, whatever it is. And I always resisted that in the past because it felt cringe. And I didn't want to be cringe. But what I've realized is, yeah, it might be cringe, and so be it. The people who find it cringe and don't want it can tell me as much. And the people that don't find it cringe may actually really appreciate it, because I do genuinely believe that what I put out into the world has value. And so in my mind, it is a symbiotic relationship wherein I get value because I get to, sit down and have some tea with a weary traveler and talk about what it is that they're going through, and hopefully, help them through it in some way, help them learn something from the value of my content or whatever. And they get to, they get to learn they get to take something from what I share with them. Reminds me of something Alan told me. If your friend who's running for office hasn't been pressuring you as simply a random friend of his to do stuff for his campaign, he's probably not going to be elected. People who get elected tend to be the ones who do a lot of asking. Yeah, and this is a lesson that I have learned before, which is ask. It is remarkably simple, but also remarkably easy to forget. That when I'm really struggling with something, usually the reason why is because I'm not asking for something that I need. And once I start asking for what I need, all of a sudden, the problem goes away. And so the idea is that, with my content going forward, I have to embrace the cringe. I have to, let people know that I'm going live, or that I just published this article and I want to hear what they think about it. And I want to sit down and have a conversation with them about it. And it's interesting. I don't really have any expectations around what that conversation should entail. It's not like I'm looking for feedback on my writing necessarily, or feedback on the ideas. I'm happy for that conversation to be whatever it is. I do know what I don't want it to be, which is I don't want it to be, it was good, or I liked it. I find that completely hollow and empty. It doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't do anything for me. But if I can have a conversation about what your experience of it was as you were engaging with it, that is really genuinely fulfilling and interesting to me. And the other fascinating thing about this is that my content, the sort of cadence that I'm putting stuff out, the stuff that I'm making, it probably won't change much. Like, I'm probably still going to be making all the same stuff. All that has changed is my relationship to it. So instead of thinking of it as, trying to crack the code on content, instead, I'm just thinking about it like, I'm making my scrawlings on parchment paper and notebooks. I have my piles of notebooks in my hut, and I share them with people when I think that they'll be helpful. There's a fine line between campaigning and badgering. Totally. So my mind might change on this, in a few months or a week or a day, whatever. I might decide, oh, you know what? I actually really do want to crack the code on content. That might happen. And for now, I'm content with this. And I think that's okay. One other story that I want to tell you all about this is that after I had this realization, I was telling my family about it. And I was expecting it to sort of be this, my family would be like, wow, okay, that's a really big realization. And instead they were like, yeah, we know that. And I was like, what do you mean you know that? And they were like, Sean, you've always been a hermit. From the time that you were a kid, you've always been, and they're right. I was always content to sit in my room and, play with Legos or play Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever. And they would always be like, aren't you worried about missing out? And I'd be like, why would I be worried about, going out and exploring the world when there's a whole universe to explore in my own head? And I still feel that way. And so it was just this really great reminder that oftentimes we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. Oftentimes it is not about reinventing yourself. It's about returning to yourself over and over and over again. So with all of this said, thank you for, if you have watched this all the way through, thank you for stopping by my neck of the woods and having a little, conversational listen with me. And I hope that this is helpful for you in some way in terms of, when you feel stuck, when you're figuring out your own journey, some piece of this being helpful for you. I like that your fam wasn't surprised. Yeah, it was, and I'll tell one other story about this, which is that I talked to my wife about this when I had this realization too. And one of the things that was reassuring was she feels this way too, which I didn't know. It was very surprising to me. But when I told her, she said, yeah, I think that, if we didn't need to make money, which, ads take care of, then we would probably just live off the land and help people. Probably what we would do together. And we would just, grow old doing that together. And that feels right to me. That feels correct. If you like hearing me talk about these realizations that I have along my own sort of personal journey, if you, prefer that to the more whatever step-by-step instruction videos that I'll sometimes make around different mental health concepts, this video goes into detail about a realization that I had about taking care of my body and my eating habits. So if you're interested in that, check it out. It'll either pop up here or down in the description, depending on where you're watching this. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.